recording? Yeah, there we go. All right, sweet. Well, hey everyone.
Hi.
Officially started. Okay. So this time we spoke about violence in literature, or we read about it rather. Do you guys want to do the chapter first, or do you guys want to do the book first?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. I got you. Well, let's start with the book because it was what were your initial thoughts on the book, just first off?
I'm going to be honest, I did not think I would like it because I got the graphic novel.
Right.
And I am not a graphic novel person,
Oh,
but I read the whole thing in 30 minutes.
Yeah, same. I read the whole, I had
City.
the first version and I knocked it out on my porch swing in an hour, you know? Yeah.
Like I couldn't put it down.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you guys said. I had a message that said my internet is unstable and everything froze.
I just said I didn't think I was gonna like it because I got the graphic novel and I'm not a graphic novel person. But I finished the whole book in 30 minutes. I couldn't put it down.
Right. So when I got this book, first of all, I was looking like this is something that I would not have picked for myself.
Yeah.
Those were my initial thoughts. And then when I start reading, I was like, okay, maybe I'm not reading this right. So I stopped and I started all over.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I was following along. But at the end, I thought it was a good book. Again, it's probably not something that I would have chosen on my own.
Yeah, for sure.
But I guess that's why we should try new things.
Yeah. My first immediate thoughts was when I picked it up, I got the one in verse and I was kind of I was leaning towards the graphic novel, but I decided that, I'm going to go for the verse one. And of course, I don't know what I was thinking because when I opened it, I was like, oh, God, it's in verse. And I'm an English teacher, and so I'm used to reading like long epic poems and whatnot. And but like I said, I flew through it. I really enjoyed it. The biggest thing that stood out to me as a matter of just like a plot device was when he was in the elevator, it did not occur to me that these people were ghosts. The author did not make it a point to say that these are ghosts or anything like that. And I like that because one of my biggest pet peeves in writing is just like when you're being spoon-fed information.
Right. Yeah.
So that it dawned on me like, oh my God, these guys are ghosts. I like that.
That was pretty cool. I did like that too. And the first time it happened, I was like, what happened? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But then as you keep reading, you figure it out. It's like, okay, I get it. I get it.
So. Yeah. I thought it was, because the first one I was like, I guess with Buck, I didn't really realize that he was a ghost until it got to Danny, and then he said that she was shot, and then I was like, wait a second, so is Buck also a ghost? And then Uncle Mark, and I was like, okay, and it's not really until the very end when he says he couldn't see any of their reflections, just his own. And I mean, that's when it's like, okay, obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, the more people who came on the
kept saying it was kind of,
and you're like, oh, that person's dead. I remember that he said that they're not alive anymore, so
Yeah, who was it who got the graphic novel? Was it you, Kristen?
I did, yeah.
So was it the same way? Like, how did they illustrate the characters when they first started?
So it was kind of interesting because I was wondering how easy it was to follow in verse form, because I felt like so many of the pictures were like so integral to the story, But let me see. Let me find the first. Like, you don't really know in the first. Let's see. So so he just, I mean, that's Buck.
Yeah.
So, like, you don't realize.
Yeah, no, don't at all.
And then, I mean, you see he's wearing like a shirt that says R.I.P. Buck, you know. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay. And then but then it was like when Danny, like I was like, okay, is he alive? Is he dead? What's going on?
Yeah.
And then when Danny gets shot, I'm like, oh, okay, so they are ghosts.
Yeah. That the shirt part was definitely the part that like it left out to me like this guy is totally dead, you know.
So did it show? Like, did it say he was wearing a shirt?
Yeah, so
I'm curious how they were different. I kind of wish I had bought both of them.
yeah. Yeah, I couldn't you know, pull it up on command, but there was a part where he said where the narrator at least was showing that there's you know, he's wearing a t-shirt that says RIP Buck.
Right.
And, you know, he
Okay.
kind of smiles at him like, what, you don't remember me? Like you don't know who I am?
Yeah.
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 Okay. Yeah, I was like, as I was reading, I'm like, okay, wait, how much of this is in the verse form?
Mm-hmm.
I really wish I had both of them to look at. I may
Yeah.
go buy the other copy.
Yeah. It'll look good on a bookshelf. Um,
Yeah, I have a lot of
I mean,
bookshelves
yeah, I have a
that
big
have
collection at
a
home.
lot of books that my husband's always like, do we need that? And I'm like,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Or
So,
then you're like, well, it's only $10, so it's okay.
yeah,
Well, like my husband, me, my kids, and each of my kids all have our own set of Harry Potter books
Really?
because I'm not giving them mine. They
yeah.
can't have mine.
No, no,
So they
no.
have their own,
Keep your
Yeah.
hands.
both of them.
So, would you guys, how would this book fit into your classroom? Like the city you teach in, the world that these kids see? Um, you know, how would this book fit into your classroom?
Um, well, I'm not sure if it would actually fit in my classroom,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some things that I could think about how could relate to some of my students.
Mm-hmm.
And not even so much for the school that I work at now, but the school that I was in prior to moving to this school. A lot of those students were exposed to like violence, and they would come to school and say, "Oh, Miss Huggins," and they would name the particular person, like somebody got shot in my neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
Um, and at first, when it first happened, it was like I was shocked because
Mm-hmm.
I had never experienced anything like that.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, I know this sounds crazy, but when they came to tell me, I didn't believe them. I'm like, no, like no one got shot in your neighborhood.
yeah.
But yeah, so um I've been in environments where students have experienced shootings in their neighborhoods, and their loved ones or people that they know
Mm-hmm.
um uh where they come to school and have those conversations.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Kristen?
Well, I live and work in a very upper middle class suburban, you know, um, not something that we deal with in this
Right.
area. Although there was a kid who was arrested for selling pot at my son's middle school last week, so that's great. But but I mean, gang violence is just not something like it's something that you see in movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Granted, I teach third grade, so this would not ever be anything that we would teach. Um, and I kind of was like, when I started it, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to relate to this, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is, we're like suburban, like, just no, like,
No
no
gang
gang,
violence, right?
nothing like that. And, but as I read the story, I realized the main idea is not gang violence. And I don't even think it's violence at all. I think it's grief and loss.
Ah,
And actually I did my one pager on that. So and I think that really it's about the loss of his brother and all these people in his life and how he's grieving them and wants revenge, which I think is a very human urge for
yeah,
everyone, you know. And so I was surprised at how much I related to it. And I actually told my kids once we finish this, I'm going to have both of my own kids read it because I thought it was really, really good. So I think that while I can relate to the gang violence, you can
yeah.
relate to the emotion
Hmm.
in the book.
Yeah, I like that because the school that I came from last before I worked here at the School for the Blind, it was definitely like charter school. Like these kids, they play GTA and that's their violence, right? Grand Theft Auto,
Yeah.
video games, their violence. But
Fortnite, I mean, yeah.
over here, I have a lot of kids coming from all over the state, and my city, Macon, like if you Google Macon, it's like the top 10 most violent cities in the U.S. I don't believe it, but that's what the articles say. So
I never knew that until recently, like
yeah,
very recently.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
really strange because I've been living here 15 years, but
You're like, you don't see that part of it.
yeah, so there's that, but then we do have kids coming from all over the school or from all over the state, and a lot of, I mean, I've had so many fights at this school. It's insane. Like, you know, and a lot of it is just so ignorant. These kids are like, well, he said this, he pushed me, so I have
Mhm.
to. It's like rule number three, you always get
Mhm.
revenge.
Mhm.
I have to do this. And, it's so frustrating trying to, like, I'm only 33. I understand that I'm fairly young as a teacher, and like I'm trying to explain to these kids, like, it doesn't have to be like this. And I'm just sounding like my mom, and I hate that because if I can hear it coming out of my mouth, then they are definitely like right over their heads, as far as like oh, that's just you. You don't know what this is like, blah 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 blah, you know. But I think it would fit in my classroom, especially being a high school classroom. We have a lot of kids from inner cities and things like that. So definitely that whole rule number three, always get revenge. I see it in the hallways. I see it in my city, you know.
Well, and I think rule number two, no snitching.
Oh,
Hey,
for
I've
sure.
heard my own kids say that, and I'm like,
Yeah.
no, if
Yeah.
you know something happens, you tell an
Say
adult.
something.
Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I just
I
thought
mean,
it
I'm here in third
was
grade.
just the rules themselves, the fact
Hmm.
that there were rules, and like the number one
Hmm.
rule was
No crying.
no crying. Crying is
Hmm.
against the rules no matter what.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like you weren't allowed to show emotions or feelings.
Hmm.
And then like the other rule, snitching. You can't
Hmm.
snitch, even though I guess, we know that if you see something, you should say something, but
Hmm.
getting that across to children, how does
Hmm.
that work? Or not just children, but people who I guess have the street life or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the revenge. Um, I guess now everybody wants revenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to use a couple of my own experiences as a teenager in my classroom. Like, I'm not shy about the fact, like, I've gotten in my share of trouble. Like, my parents picked me up from the police station a couple of times, just from skateboarding, no big deal, but they don't need to know that. They need to think I'm like some, some guys with
Super
a
tough.
right, a big tough guy, and so like I try to relate with them, and like I still have to, like, it pings like a trespassing charge. I was jumping over a staircase, and that shows up on my background check. Like 15
Hmm.
years later, I have to write a letter of explanation every time they run a background check on this. And it's crazy. And so I try to tell them, like, these things are going to be, you're making decisions. You're allowing a 15-year-old to make decisions for 40-year-old you.
Hmm.
Sometimes that clicks, sometimes it doesn't, but that's the most success that I do have, as far as that whole like spiel goes when I'm trying to wag my finger at a kid.
Well, and I think that It's true. Like when you're 13, 14, 15, you don't think about, you know, what the revenge is going to entail later on, or what
Yeah.
the no snitching, you know, like you may not be snitching, but then you might be lumped in with a group of kids who, you
Yeah.
know, gets in trouble, and then you by, you know, default get in trouble too because you didn't tell anybody. And I mean, I say like these were rules for the street, for the gang, whatever, but I don't think they're that different than the rules that our kids make up for themselves, really.
Yeah. And then something else it said the rules weren't meant to be broken. They were made for the broken to follow.
Yeah.
So, you know, I thought that I just thought that was
Poignant.
yeah. When you think about the rules themselves and then that piece of information, how they weren't meant to be broken, but they were made for the broken to follow.
Right.
You know, and that for that for the streets or the gang, I guess, you know, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, another thing that was really cool, as far as these characters goes, it's only once they were dead, these ghosts were like the murderer and the person who got killed, they forgave each other, you know, they're, hey, what's up? How's it going? But even more so than that, they it seemed like only after death is when they had their wisdom, right? Like, I forget the character, but he kept grilling him, like, how do you know this is the right guy, right?
Right.
You know, because I shot the wrong guy.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it kind of ties into the whole like once you grow up or once you don't get to grow up, you know, that's when you're smart.
Right. You look at things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me see if I highlighted anything else before I did have a question on the end, but I didn't want to get there until we were all.
Well, there was another part that written down. I don't know where to go. Let's see. So when he's talking about Buck, I kind of got like, okay, like basically somebody would kill somebody and then somebody else would kill somebody, but in Will talks a couple of times about his mom said, just remember when you're walking in the nighttime, make sure the nighttime ain't walking in you. And then he says with his dad, he says like something had gotten into me, and then Will says that something must be what my mom meant by the nighttime. And then when it gets to Buck, it says Buck was two-sided, two dads, Step and Real. Step raised him a preacher, not scared of no one, praying for anyone, helping everyone. Real run through him, a bank robber, would steal air from the world if he could get his hands on it. People always said he was taught to do good, but doing bad was in his blood. And there's that nighttime mom always be talking about. It'll snatch your teaching from you, put a gun in your hand, a grumble in your gut, and some sharp in your teeth. Just this idea that you can be taught to do the right thing, but then the nighttime gets in you and makes you make bad decisions.
Yeah. And just because a kid may make a not so great decision, it doesn't mean that they were not taught better, because they very well could have been taught better, but you know, sometimes you just get caught up with influence or different, you know, other things that makes you make a bad choice or a poor choice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's so easy to get wrapped up like in just, you know, you could be doing something totally normal and then like, you know, the police see you do one thing and the next thing you know, here comes a ticket or whatever. You know, you're goofing off at the mall with your friends, right? Or whatever. Yeah. What about the anagrams? Did you guys find any like like I kind of struggled even as an English teacher. Like, what purpose did they? I mean, I see that they were like related to the plot. Like, cool is loco, right? But what did you guys like pick up on anything as to why the author put these in, or how they advanced the plot, or anything like that? Like, just like, because I couldn't really figure out like the anagrams, like any connections or anything like that. And I didn't want to write them off as just like a stylistic choice that the author used. So I was going to ask if you guys found any like deeper meaning into those.
I'm not sure if in the graphic novel it really focused in on those. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
different in the verse form, but I didn't like sit and go, oh, you know.
Yeah. Like I can find one real quick.
There are, yeah, I did notice that those were in the text. And when I think about it, I think that the author just used that, he just chose that particular style of writing. Maybe for the writer to kind of think a little deeper about some of the meanings that he was, or the connections that he was trying to make.
Right. Okay. Well, okay, you know, I'm sitting here asking that question, but then on second read, in the verse it says on page 187, we're talking about Uncle Mark and his camera, and he's shooting his movie. And then you turn the page, it says cinema equals Iceman, right? And that's all the page says. And then on the next
See, it
page,
doesn't say that on the
graphic novel,
let me
I
see.
got you. And then the next page, so we go from shooting a cinema into talking about the Iceman. He says, I'm not sure what an Iceman is, but it makes me think of bad dudes, cold-blooded.
Hmm.
And bad dude being Uncle Mark, the
Yeah.
Iceman. And I know it's lingo too, like I iced him, you know, I iced the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting because that's not in the, unless I'm just like, I don't see that anywhere in here.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Like I'm trying to find it. I think it'd be interesting if we, I wish I'd gotten both and had them next to each other, you know?
Yeah.
I got one thing, with Uncle Mark, he's like, you know, he's talking about his movie or whatever, and then he says to Will, let's set the scene, and then play it out like it's a movie. Um, and then
We had that too.
and then he says, you know, he's gonna do this, he's gonna do that, and then Will can't. He says, "Go ahead and finish it," and he
You
can't
can't.
say it.
Yeah.
Like finish it. And then he says, he says, and Will says nothing, and he says, "What happens next?" And he says, "Nothing. That's it. The end." And Uncle Mark says, "The end. It's never the end. Never. Like
Yeah.
it just keeps, you know."
Yeah. Because yeah, rule number
The
3.
circle keeps going. Yeah.
Yeah, and he acknowledges that in the book too. You know, if I shoot this guy, then I'm gonna have a target on my back.
Right.
Well then, what about the only thing that how did the graphic novel end? He asks a question in our book.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says, "You coming?" Yeah, same.
And then it just ends.
And then it just ends. And so
I like that it left it open ended.
You do?
I do. Yeah.
yeah, it is a stylistic choice, and it was jarring for me too. Like I had to suspend my disbelief because I was thinking like, okay, this is prose. They're gonna break the rules. They're gonna make choices as the author to, you know, blend art and literature. But It was jarring because all of these situations had closure. All of these dialogues and conversations, they had like a conclusion or a lesson that you can take from it. And then as soon as
Mhm.
we get down to the bottom of this long way down,
Yeah.
we asked him if he's coming, and then that was it.
Yeah, and I was like, there has to be more.
I know, right? What do you guys think? Do you think you wound up going with the ghosts and riding the elevator back up? What was the
So
impression you got?
I will say, I mean, it does leave you hanging,
Yeah.
but this would give you a great opportunity to have your kids write
Finish
what
the
happens
ending.
next
Yeah.
and to
That's
talk
fair,
about
man.
like, what is he going to do? Like, what would you do? I mean, of course, it's so easy to say, yeah, I would go back upstairs, but like, what, I mean, what's going to happen? It's like a real, like, jumping off point, I think.
Yeah. It would make a good writing assignment for sure. It would fit into the classroom. What would the majority of you guys as students say? Like, do you think that they like just knowing your kids, do you think they would wind
Well,
up, you know,
I think that can be subjective a little bit
mm-hmm.
because he says, "Are you coming?"
Mm-hmm.
So,
Are you coming to, where is he coming? Where are they asking him to go?
right, but then ideally, based on what we read, we're hoping, I guess, and I could be wrong, but I guess we're hoping that Will make the right decision to decide to go or not to go. But essentially, we don't know where he's going.
Yeah.
So,
I thought that was interesting too, because they like walk out of the elevator and say, "Are you coming?" So if he's gonna go back up the elevator, wouldn't he stay in the elevator? He wouldn't leave the elevator.
Well,
right.
another thing, and I was very loosely convincing myself of this, but like it's the ghosts asking him if he's coming. Like, are you coming with us to the afterlife?
Oh, to
Like,
the
are you going
yeah.
to carry
I
this
kind
through?
of thought about that,
Yeah,
but
yeah. But this conversation we're having here would make, is probably exactly what the author wanted us to do. So we played into his trap.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, I think the kids in my class would all say, because what are you supposed to say? You're supposed to say, of course, he's not going to go get revenge. He's going to decide to be good. And,
Yeah.
So I guess that would be like the right choice.
Mhm.
Based on what your parents teach you.
Yeah.
Not to seek revenge.
But I think like,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
I think that he is the entire time I just kind of got the vibe that he is going through the motions because that's what's expected of him. But by engaging with these ghosts of his past and even answering their questions in the first place, he's leaning on the side of like, I don't want to do this, and he can't even finish the movie script,
Right.
Like I was definitely getting the impression that he didn't want to go through this, but it's just expected of him.
You felt like you had to.
That's what's expected of you when someone kills your family.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of interesting because that like end of the book, again, I think like most of I think my kids would say, oh yeah, you shouldn't, he shouldn't go through with it, he should go back upstairs. But if you live in an area where there are gangs and kids are involved in gangs, or they have aunts and uncles or cousins who are involved in gangs, they might see it differently.
Yeah, because for them that could be the norm.
Right. Well, and when it's talking about in the chapter, it was kind of talking about how there were these books that you could use to talk like the sample lesson, talking about the book, like it doesn't have to be this way. And like how kids can say no to being in a gang. Like I think this book would be a really good way to talk about something like that if you had like here's all these ghosts coming and telling him like I shot the wrong person, that I don't know. I think it could be a good way if you deal with that in your school community. It could be a good way to have the discussion.
Yeah. I think it's authentic too because the vulgarity in here, like a lot of the times when you assign a book, to kids, they see it as yapping, right? Like, oh, here's another lesson I got to learn,
Yeah.
from someone who doesn't really know what's going on, right? But like the vulgarity adds like some rawness to it, some authenticness to it as well. So I did appreciate that. It kind of tied into the censorship topic from a few sessions ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this a real is this a real story? Like, is it based on something that happened in his life?
I was reading up on his. This is a common motif in a lot of his writing. So I was reading up on him, and it does. Um, he is in it. Like, there's a little forward where he says that he goes to the detention centers and meets with brothers and sisters and things like that. So I think this is definitely at least something personal to him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how deep he was in it, but again, this is a motif in his
writings.
Yeah, in his writings.
Yeah, I thought the forward for all the young brothers and sisters in detention centers around the country, the ones I've seen and the ones I haven't, you are loved. Like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I was going to mention is that I bet you, and I'd put money on this, a lot of kids, if we were to have an open Socratic discussion in a classroom with that last question, like, what would you do if you were in Will's place? A lot of them would answer what's expected of them, but in their private writings, they would definitely be like, I would use this opportunity to get out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like when you said like, what would the kids in your class say? And obviously third grade, I'm not gonna be doing this, but I have a couple of kids who I think they would say, "Oh yeah, you shouldn't get revenge," but that is not what I see.
Yeah, it's the opposite too,
Like I see
for even
them
like,
trying to get
well-behaved
revenge,
kids.
obviously not shooting people, but like if somebody hurts them, they go out set out to
do
slap
what they
them around a
did.
bit,
right. So it is like I said, it's a human urge.
Yeah.
Maybe not to that extent, but
to set things right. Well then, moving on to the textbook. I saw another repetitive, I think it was last time where I was mentioning it felt like it was a little repetitive. And another thing that's repetitive in this chapter was, should books be more violent to get more readers? / how desensitized are the kids today? Like, it's kind of like with social media, you'll see like a video be posted with obviously wrong, like for example, just from my world, a handyman video where some guy's installing trim completely wrong. He's doing it on purpose so that you're generating comments, right? And you get people arguing in the comments, and to the algorithm, that's engagement, right? And so there's the same thing here in the book, is asking the question like, how should books be more violent to get more engagement with the readers? Or, where do we draw the line, right? And so that was the repetitive thing. Did you guys kind of catch up on that too?
Yeah, and basically the chapter opens with that question because that question's on the first page of the chapter.
Gotcha. I got the digital book, and
yeah.
Yeah, violence cannot be avoided in literature, even. Yeah. The issue is not whether violence has a place in children's literature, because history has shown that it has, but whether violence can be justified and
Yeah. I actually wrote that down, the Tomlinson quote.
Oh,
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. And I liked it because it like literature goes on to reflect the human condition, whatever that may be, whether it's violent or peaceful or whatever, sexuality, like, or, something that needs to be censored. It reflects the human condition. Art imitates life, right? And so it can't be avoided in literature because real life is violent.
Yeah.
Anything from stories in the Bibles, to Little Red Riding Hood, getting gobbled up is inherently terrifying, but it's like the
Yeah.
sing-songy little thing, and
It's so interesting because like the original fairy tales are extremely violent.
oh, they're
And they talk
fantastic.
about
Yeah.
that.
Like Sleeping Beauty, like she
Yeah.
gets I'm trying to see if my kids are here. She gets raped and then like when she's
Yeah.
asleep and like then somebody eats her babies. I mean, it's like ridiculous. Like
Yeah. Yeah, Cinderella, the sisters get their eyes poked out.
yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
um yeah, the Little Mermaid. I mean, it's all these like they're not the Disney versions that we watch.
Yeah.
That they see now.
Yeah. And even I think like when I was little in the Three Little Pigs, they used to cook the wolf. And now the wolf runs
Ah.
off. You
Yeah,
know,
that's right,
like
because the wolf fell down the chimney or something, didn't he?
yeah, he fell down the chimney into a pot of boiling water and died.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And now he just runs off, you
Yeah.
know? Which is kind of funny because now with like TV and video games being so violent, they're like making the nursery rhymes and stuff that are violent less violent.
Less violent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the book brought that up too,
Yeah.
like being gobbled alive is, like I said, inherently terrifying, but these kids, like, it just rolls off the shoulders because of what they,
Mhm.
in modern
Yeah.
day.
But I think in comparison, kids now are exposed to violence because outside of literature, because again they have the video games, they have TV. Most kids have a cell phone, and in cases like that we don't always know what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Or just because you monitor your kid's cell phone, I may not monitor my kid's cell phone.
Yeah. And it's exceedingly easy to accidentally stumble on footage from the Ukraine war, soldier with a GoPro on his helmet.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because violence doesn't always have to mean blood. Like
Yeah.
you said, violence can be a war.
Yeah.
There are different types of violence.
Well, and to me, like that is more terrifying because that's real. Like video games are fake, and like often now my kids don't play GTA, but like Fortnite, you shoot somebody, they die, like they just
Yeah.
right?
It's all very comical, yeah.
And the same thing, like I let my even when they were little, I let my kids watch Star Wars. Pew pew, they fall over. Like there's no blood, there's no like, but footage from the Palestine-Israeli conflict. I mean, if that comes across your Facebook or your Instagram or YouTube, you're probably seeing real, babies or kids, that are dead. I mean,
Yeah. And you didn't
But then
see that either.
just being able to have those conversations or that dialogue. And, I guess as a parent, it's a safe space. You're in a safe space to do that. Whereas at school, you have to tread lightly with the conversations that you choose to have. More so in elementary school.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine.
Well, yeah.
I'm lucky in that in the high school classroom you can be.
I have to say, ask your parents because
Yeah.
we're not about to get fired for having that conversation.
Right.
On page 132 in the book, there's a quote, and it says, "Violence has always been a part of children's literature. It provides a safe buffer zone where children can clarify their stance on moral issues by exploring alternatives and exercise their responses to the terrible and be prepared for it in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about like how like when you're choosing a book, and you know, I mean, most books have some type of conflict, which often does involve violence. Had like questions to ask yourself. And the questions were what message are students taking from it?
Mm-hmm.
Does the book imprint violence or peace as its like final message? And do the students need an adult to help navigate the subject?
Yeah.
So like last year we were talking, I mean, in 5th grade, I was working in 5th grade, and social studies standard is World War II and the Holocaust, you know. I mean, and we read Number the Stars, which doesn't have I mean, it's not overtly, but I mean, talks about concentration camps and
Yeah.
stuff. And like that's like you have to help kids get through that. Like you have to help talk them through it.
Right.
Yes.
Or at least the vast majority are not mature enough at 10 to be able to deal with that themselves, I think. But like the ultimate message in that book is this is wrong. The violence was, you know, like it is a peace, like the message is towards peace and
Yeah.
not that the violence was good. And I think that's like the big thing when you're talking about, like, I feel like this one, it's really violent, but I think the ultimate message is he shouldn't.
You know, could you go through with it? You shouldn't do
Right.
this. Yeah.
Right, right.
Maybe the revenge piece,
Mhm.
the revenge rule.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, I had like my own link, and again, like GTA is total scapegoat when it comes to violent video games, but like, you know, it's so easy. The violence in Grand Theft Auto is so gratuitous. It almost gets it's almost satirical, right? Like you're
Yeah.
making fun of how ridiculous this is. If you were able to just go about life with no consequences, this is what that would look like. And as an
Yeah.
adult, that's easy to, you know, make that academic connection. But I grew up playing, you know, Grand Theft Auto 2, right? And so I've been around for the franchise. And when I was a kid, it's like, yeah, let's go, you know, stab people with a screwdriver because it's fun. I didn't I didn't have an adult around to tell me like, hey, this is the social
Not a good
commentary
thing to
that's been
do. Yeah.
going on. Yeah, this is the social commentary that's being made, and you really shouldn't be playing this game because you're not 17 or 18.
I know
Yeah.
my 13-year-old's like, can I buy GTA 5 when it comes out? I'm like, if it comes out in 5 years, then sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But yeah, that goes
I
back
didn't
to
like that answer.
you know, having the adult around, right? To
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah. There's another connection I wanted to make to oh, about violence in the I have this thought and I'm struggling to phrase it. Violence, we can come back to it. We can come back to it. Oh, right. How would like in our book, right? You know, it's violent, and you find yourself asking yourself, how would you react in this situation? And then it goes into that quote that you brought up from the textbook, um, because it's a real life situation that's simulated so that it's a safe space for you to navigate this situation. And it's the same thing with, I think it was gender and sexuality, you know, watching these kids navigate tricky social avenues, you know. What would I do if I was in their shoes?
Yeah.
And one of the things in the book is like, well, how much is too much? You know, leaving something for the imagination, as far as the violence is concerned.
Yeah, they mentioned that with like special effects, you know, in movies nowadays. Like Kristen said, you know, in Star Wars you get shot, you fall down, right? Whereas now it's like, let's zoom in. You know,
Yeah.
let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I thought was interesting that they talked about was like real life and history and violence, like how that affects things. Because like it talked about a couple of different things. Like it talked about um Hurricane Katrina, and things like the tsunami, and those are like natural occurrences that still had like this, not, it's a different type of violence, but like this damage and this destruction and stuff, and how like those are things kids deal with.
Mhm.
Hurricanes, like I have a kid who just moved here this year, and he moved from Florida, and their house was destroyed by a hurricane in last
So
year.
that would be like the real history, like real life violence, like
right, but like
real
books,
experiences.
yeah, books can help you work through those. 9/11. I mean, I was in college when that happened, and like we was doing my student teaching, and it's like, well, not my student teaching, but like a placement, and it's like, how do we talk to these kids about this? Because they're seeing it on the news, right? Like there's no way, even if their parents aren't letting them watch videos of people jump from the buildings, they still know this happened. And you have to, like, you have to address it. You can't just be like, yeah,
Yeah.
nothing happened, we talked about Oklahoma City bombing, and just
Yeah.
how books can help you work through that.
Yes, exactly. Books are cathartic, watching
Mhm.
other people go through these, it's like it validates the fact that, okay, I'm not the only one that goes through this.
Right.
Yeah. And that's
And
how
it,
I would, the next time, God forbid, something happens in the US and I have to have that conversation with my
yeah,
kids. I think that would be the avenue that I take. Like,
yeah.
you guys go through bad stuff. It happens all over.
hmm And of course, you wouldn't have a book. I mean, like this book that they're talking about, Oklahoma City bombing, didn't come out until after Oklahoma City bombing, but you can pull from those, like, okay, if there's another terrorist thing that happens or a bombing, like you have these other books of other things
To help
that you
support
could pull,
or to explain.
And even like they were talking about, like for history, like I'm saying, like Number of the Stars, um and there's so many books, but like how a lot of times when kids are reading textbooks, it's hard to understand the conflicts, right?
Mhm.
Like it's a lot of times way over their heads. um but if they read a story about kids their age experiencing that thing, it can I mean, I know, like the American Girl dolls. There's a girl named Kit, and in 5th grade last year, we watched Meet Kit when we were talking about the Great Depression, and it was just a fun day. Like we had other
Yeah.
stuff going on, but it really helps you see like this little girl who's 10 years old and the types of things she had to deal with. My grandmother got me the Meet Molly books because she was 10 during World War II, just like Molly was, and it helped me. She had friends whose dads were away at war and didn't come back, and it
So
just,
a story that actually portrayed real life.
right, and it helps you understand the feelings and um the emotions
Yeah.
That the
from it,
character
and
had
helps
to
you
work
better
through.
understand the time period and the historical.
Yeah. The shock value of these real life situations and watching kids navigate these like military level violence can also serve a purpose too. There was this book I was reading on the American Civil War, and I forget this. I wish I could remember, but it's this kid goes out into the woods to play soldier with a stick. He comes back, his house is on fire because the soldiers passed by. He saw what he thought were animals drinking out of the river, and they were really soldiers drinking, and they were so exhausted they couldn't pick their heads back up, and they drowned in the river. And then one of them picks his head up, and his whole jaw is missing, right? And this is a child like narrating this,
Yeah.
and it kind of just shows the futility of everything, like as a plot device, so it could this real life gratuitous violence could serve a purpose as far as like making social commentary, at the very least.
I read The Devil's Arithmetic a couple months ago, which is a story about a little girl, a Jewish girl, in New York in like I think the 70s maybe. And her grandparents had been in concentration camps in World War II. And she just is not taking any of it seriously, She just thinks her grandfather's just like this crazy old man or whatever. And during the Seder, she gets told to go to the door to let Joshua, I think it is. And anyways, and she gets transported back in time to World War II. And she ends up going to this concentration camp, and she finds out that the people she spends time with are her aunt and her grandfather, but she doesn't realize it, right?
Yeah.
Until later, because they changed their names, they Americanized their names. And it's just this like from a 13-year-old's perspective of the horrors of the concentration camp. And it's a really good book. I read it because it was censored. It was on a banned book list, so
You rebel.
I am very much a rebel. I was like,
yeah, there's a
reading.
My librarian here at school was wearing a t-shirt last Friday. It says I'm with the band, except BANNED with a bunch of books.
Mm-hmm.
Thought it was clever. I gotta get it.
Cute.
I was always like reading banned books under my desk. I had a teacher say, "I'm going to tell your mom you're reading that book." I was like, "She gave it to me."
Yeah. I keep having these thoughts and then they escape. Such is life. Such is life. Let me look over my notes real quick. See what else I wrote down.
Question with these sample response lessons.
Yeah.
And reading them, because I feel like they're kind of I don't know how to say it. Like, I don't like the way that they're set up. I think that the books and talking about it is a good idea, but I feel like it's very contrived the way it's done.
Are you talking about the discussion questions at the end of the chapter?
No, like the sample response lessons where it's like, do this, read this book, make a poster, blah, blah, blah. Like make a poster and winter, hush, every day, I swear. Make a poster and about why you shouldn't join a gang or whatever.
I see where you're at.
And I feel like that's like very contrived. And of course, kids are going to say, yeah, you shouldn't join a gang.
Yeah.
Whereas I think like it just kind of reminds me of Dare.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was just thinking about how like the girl who won the essay contest, why she wasn't going to do drugs, was caught smoking weed at school and lost the homecoming crown. Yeah. So definitely she was just saying what she, things can change.
Expected of her.
Like it was contrived and it wasn't real, right?
Yes.
Whereas I feel like something like this, and I haven't read those books, but I feel like something like this and just like doing a response or having kids like write what they think happens next feels more authentic to me, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could do some really good extension activities with this particular book.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
And granted, I haven't read the other books, so maybe, and they are geared towards younger kids too. One of the ones they're talking about. But I just was like, oh, it feels like Dare. Say why you're not going to do drugs, even though you're already smoking weed behind your school,
It's because the officer told me not to, and got out of class on a Friday.
And then, like, you see Officer Wood later, and you I'm like, no, I'm not selling drugs on a street corner. I won the essay contest and got a ride in your pop car.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just they don't feel very authentic to me, I guess, when I'm reading the lessons.
Yeah, for sure. That's an excellent point. Yeah, trying to make those real world connections can be tricky like that because it could be something that's authentic, or it could be like even the kids, they know when they're writing this stuff, they're like, busy work, whatever.
Yeah, sometimes they know they're just doing stuff just for the sake of getting it done because I
Yeah.
have to do it, but
Yeah.
it's kind of like meaningless to them. They're gonna put what they know you want to hear.
I just feel like if it's like approached in a more like organic way, like you read the book and then you just start discussing and not like, here's poster boards, make a poster about why you should join us.
Yeah.
Like
you almost trick them into, analyzing their own thoughts,
Right, yeah. I don't know. Kids are smarter than we think they are, so they're not gonna fall.
Not gonna fall for it, yeah.
Yeah, they are pretty smart.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me take a look at, speaking of those questions in the back. I feel like I'm looking at those 5 and we nailed a lot of them.
Yeah, we really did.
Questions for the teacher?
Yeah. Like, my personal views on violence in children's books, as long as it can serve a purpose, and I'm speaking as like academia, the stuffy literature high school teacher, like it can serve a purpose for maybe a foil character or discussion or advancing the plot, so it can definitely be a good. I'm pretty unapologetic when it comes to that sort of thing. Like, no, we're going to speak about this objectively and we're going to talk about it. And if your parents have a problem with it, well, it wouldn't be the first email I got this year.
But then sometimes the violence, it represents real life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it goes back to those questions. Like, is it just throwing in violence where violence, like, is it just throwing in violence to throw in violence to make kids want to read the book?
Yeah.
Or is there like a point behind it? Like, like you can't have like even little kid books, like there needs to be some type of conflict. It can't always be happy because there's nothing for them to want to delve into with that. But also, like, you don't want it to just be like, boom, pow, his brain exploded out of his head.
Right.
Like
that goes back to leaving something for the imagination.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think about like older books, like you think of the Cask of Amontillado.
Yeah, Cask of Amontillado, yeah.
You can take that. Sorry, my kids are asking. They can take Pepto-Bismol. It's fine. You can take one. Okay.
Chug a lug.
But like that one really doesn't say what's gonna like. It's not like. But then if you really think about what's gonna happen,
behind that wall,
awful, right?
Yeah, it's terrible.
Or like the Telltale Heart. Like those books aren't like super like in the blue, like they're not like they do leave stuff to the imagination, and I sometimes feel like that's worse. Like that's more like if you have a good imagination, that can be more.
Yeah. When you're forced to think about it instead of like being spoon-fed the details, that makes your skin crawl a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cask of Amontillado. Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, both of my kids have had to write essays about that.
Yeah.
So, but like, I mean, that's an older book, and it's not. There's no gratuitous violence, but it's still a really creepy. Story.
Some of Edgar Allan Poe's stories though are very gratuitous. There's one called The Black Cat. If you guys want some, bedtime reading. It's he buries a hatchet in his wife's brain and puts her in the wall, and
Oh my gosh.
you know,
Come here. Jacob, come here. There's this story called The Lottery. Hey, boys, come here. Come here. Do you read a story about the lottery, or was that your brother? The lottery story? Yeah, come here. So there's this story called The Lottery, and it's like that. It doesn't really say what's going to happen. It does. Well, anyways, but it's like, it doesn't like describe it, but like you
yeah.
read it, you imagine it in your head, and it's like, yeah, anyways, it's really good. It's a short story, but
Nice.
it kind of like leaves it
I'm
on
gonna
a
write that
cliffhanger,
down.
and you're like, what?
Is it, so it's a kid's book?
Well, Myers, when did you read that? 8th grade, maybe? 8th grade advanced content. You remember who wrote it? It's a short story.
Okay.
But they didn't have to write like what you thought happened next on that one, I feel like. Like it kind of is on a cliffhanger like this, but then you have to like write what.
Okay.
It kind of tells you, but kind of doesn't, and then they had to like write about it. Anyways, it's a good one.
Well, you guys have anything else to add?
I don't think so.
That is our time. I don't mean to cut it short, but I had to ask special permission to stay late from, they said 5:15, the campus shuts down. I was like, funny you should say that now after 6 years.
My son has a trumpet lesson in 10 minutes, so he's got to use the computer. So, so I will lead the next one, I guess.
Yep.
War, terrorism, justice, and freedom.
Yeah.
Not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. Is that good for y'all?
Hold on, not next Tuesday, right?
Right, not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that, the 5th. Yeah.
At the same time.
Yep.
Works.
If that works for y'all.
That works. Yep.
Okay.
And just for the record, though, I just wanted to say, as far as like Todd being the host this time, I don't want there to be any confusion when she looks at this and it says Carrie's the host. I started on one laptop and had to switch over, and then it kicked her over, and now she's the host. And
I'm not sure once you record it, I'm not sure if it actually shows who was the true host afterwards.
So I told on myself. Gotcha. All righty.
Okay.
All right. See you guys next time.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.